In April 1945, the German capital was reduced to a landscape of hollowed-out concrete and ash. Soviet artillery had leveled the city block by block, dismantling the nerve center of the Third Reich. As the continent burned above, Adolf Hitler spent his final hours confined to a subterranean bunker, hiding from the consequences of a war he started. Looking at this absolute ruin, a chilling question remains. How did a fragile, functioning democracy willingly surrender its authority to a totalitarian regime that engineered global war and industrialized genocide? The seeds of that collapse were planted decades earlier. Following World War I, the Treaty of Versailles burdened the young Weimar Republic with 132 billion gold marks in reparations, a debt the nation simply could not afford. By 1923, the government defaulted. When French and Belgian troops occupied the industrial Ruhr Valley in response, the Weimar government funded a massive worker strike the only way it could, by printing vast, unbacked quantities of paper money. This chart visualizes the mathematical reality of that decision. In 1914, the exchange rate stood at 4.2 marks to the US dollar. By late 1923, it took 4.2 trillion marks to buy a single dollar. The government was forced to print currency in rapidly escalating denominations just to keep up with daily price hikes. A 20 million mark note became practically worthless. Citizens found their life savings wiped out, and simple tasks like buying bread required wheelbarrows full of cash. Businesses shuttered, wiping out jobs and pushing millions into severe poverty. Protest and civil unrest spilled into the streets as people starved. This total economic collapse hollowed out public trust. The Weimar democracy became synonymous with chaos, creating a political vacuum eagerly waiting for someone promising order. That desperation resurfaced during the Great Depression of 1929. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party capitalized on the renewed misery, blaming the Republic's leaders and promising to restore national strength. Yet, Hitler never secured an absolute majority mandate from the German electorate. In fact, he challenged the incumbent President Paul von Hindenburg in the 1932 elections and decisively lost. Frustrated by parliamentary gridlock, a small group of conservative, anti-democratic politicians, led by former Chancellor Franz von Papen, schemed to harness the Nazis' populist energy. They pressured the aging Hindenburg into legally appointing Hitler as Chancellor in January 1933. Conservative elites dismantled the Republic from within, mistakenly believing they could manipulate a populist extremist for their own ends. Once in office, Hitler immediately exploited constitutional loopholes to suspend civil liberties, ban opposing parties, and construct a centralized dictatorship. To enforce obedience, the regime organized the SS and established the Gestapo, the secret state police. The Gestapo was remarkably small, employing roughly one officer for every 10,000 citizens. To maintain their grip, they relied on ordinary Germans voluntarily spying on and denouncing their neighbors. Simultaneously, Joseph Goebbels constructed a vast propaganda network. The state targeted youth through mandatory education programs and redefined the role of German women, treating them strictly as biological resources meant to bear children for a pure Aryan race. By replacing democratic participation with constant surveillance and psychological manipulation, the state effectively seized control of both public life and the private mind. Behind the scenes, the Nazi government approved a highly classified 35 billion Reichsmark rearmament program, blatantly violating the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty. Conscription was reinstated, rapidly building the Wehrmacht into a massive, offensive-capable armed force, numbering in the millions. This map tracks the regime's unopposed territorial acquisitions. By threatening military action, Germany absorbed Austria in March 1938 and annexed the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia shortly after. The illusion of European peace shattered on September 1, 1939, when German forces launched a full-scale invasion of Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. The core Nazi ideology of Lebensraum demanded aggressive expansion into Eastern Europe, making a catastrophic global conflict a fundamental certainty of their rule. Under the shadow of war, the regime escalated its persecution of European Jews. The initial phase involved stripping minority populations of their legal rights and concentrating them into overcrowded, disease-ridden ghettos. This evolved into the final solution. To execute it, the state mobilized government ministries and police forces and the Continental Railway network to deport millions of people from their homes. Trains packed with victims arrived at 5 specialized killing centers in occupied Poland, facilities constructed for the singular purpose of industrial-scale murder. Of the 6 million Jewish men, women, and children murdered in the Holocaust, approximately 2.7 million were systematically suffocated in the gas chambers of these 5 camps. A slaughter of this magnitude required immense coordination. It relied on the active participation of countless guards, doctors, and administrators, and the quiet complicity of ordinary citizens. The Holocaust stands as the terrifying ultimate endpoint of a state that categorizes human beings as biological threats and successfully strips them of all legal protections. Meanwhile, the German war machine seemed unstoppable. Utilizing a lightning-fast doctrine of combined arms in its blitzkrieg, the Wehrmacht quickly crushed Western Europe. But in June 1941, the regime made a fatal strategic miscalculation. Betraying their non-aggression pact, German forces invaded the Soviet Union in Operation Barbarossa. The grueling winter campaign culminated in the Battle of Stalingrad. The destruction of the German Sixth Army and the ruins of the city permanently turned the tide on the Eastern Front. The pressure multiplied in June 1944, when Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy, trapping Germany in a massive, grinding two-front war. Blinded by ideological arrogance, the Nazis vastly overextended their logistics across thousands of miles of hostile territory, sealing their own military doom. The Reich collapsed inward. Relentless Allied bombing campaigns pulverized German industrial centers and reduced major cities to ash. By the spring of 1945, the war reached its conclusion in the streets of Berlin, where the remnants of the German military were surrounded and dismantled by the advancing Soviet army. Adolf Hitler evaded accountability for the destruction he orchestrated, committing suicide in his bunker just days before German commanders signed an unconditional surrender. By May 1945, a 12-year dictatorship had left the European continent physically shattered, divided, and morally bankrupt. In the aftermath, the surviving architects of the terror state were pulled from the shadows. 24 high-ranking officials were indicted and brought before an international military tribunal in Nuremberg. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of their atrocities. Ultimately, 12 of the defendants were sentenced to death for their roles in the conspiracy and the slaughter. The Nuremberg trials established a vital precedent in international law. For the first time, national leaders were held individually accountable for waging aggressive war and committing crimes against humanity. The sheer scale of the Third Reich's devastation forced a global response, directly catalyzing the creation of the United Nations to prevent future conflicts. The horrors exposed in the death camps pushed the international community to draft the modern framework for universal human rights. The human toll remains difficult to fully comprehend. Over 6 million Jewish people were systematically murdered, alongside tens of millions of soldiers and civilians dead worldwide. History shows that democracy is remarkably fragile. It can be dismantled legally, piece by piece, when the public gives in to fear and apathy. Remembering how these institutions shatter is humanity's only defense against the return of totalitarianism.